Good morning. In my own daily devotions, I've been going through Paul's epistles to the Corinthians. And this morning I just started chapter 12. And I had a thought. Maybe I'll just record what I do each morning in my devotions in studying what Paul has to say about spiritual gifts. Now, there's two reasons for that, two possible impacts for you. One, you can see at least how I understand what Paul is saying about spiritual gifts. But two, you can see what I do on a regular basis in Bible study. So, um, if you like, join me each morning. I'm hoping to keep it to 12 to 15 minutes every day. So let's just start. I'll share my screen with you. There we go. And I have already gone to Bible Gateway and come up with this passage from 1 Corinthians 12, verse 1 down to verse 11. Now, uh, read through the passage. If you want to pause the video and read through it in a leisurely pace, that's fine. But I'm going to hop right into it. You know that one of the first things that I do is I begin to look for primarily conjunctions, like the word therefore. Not so much because there's conjunctions as that they indicate relationships between sections of the passage. So we see the word therefore, we see the word except. And then we notice here there's a repetition that happens with a particular formula. In that formula, it's very interesting what Paul does. He says there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in them all, it's the same God at work. Now, if you'll notice here, Spirit, Lord, God. Corinthians is very early in the church. And if you'll notice here, this is a very clear reference to the Trinity. At least at some level, Paul is beginning to understand the intricacies of theology. Here, Trinitarian theology specifically. And that's, to me, that is just absolutely amazing that this early in the church, just about 15 years maybe after Jesus's death, we have an understanding that there are three persons of the Trinity. Second thing that we can look at here is Paul talks about three different types of gifts. First, he calls gifts. Second, he calls service. And third, he calls working. Now, it's not overtly clear, but working is the very same word as manifestation here. So we do have a repetition here of this word. And this, to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. This apparently is a general declaration of what is to follow. He spells out the different kinds of workings here, the different kinds of gifts. This can relate back to a passage in Romans chapter 12, verse 6 to 8, where Paul says that God gives different gifts to all of us. And then the different kinds of service occurs in Ephesians 4, verse 11. Same word is used there. God gives different services, or there it's translated ministries. So interesting how Paul breaks that down. Now let's take a look at the manifestation of the Spirit, and I'm going to do something here. Since this is a relationship of particularization, I'm going to insert a table here. So we're going to come down here now to this short little passage, and then plug these in up here one at a time. They're separated by commas. That makes it easy to pick up and do this too, just separating all of it so we can see kind of this list, check its makeup, and understand a little bit of what Paul is doing here. And as you can see, to one is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom. You'll see what I'm trying to do here in a second. To another, the message of knowledge by the same Spirit. Then to another, faith. Interesting. This pretty obviously is a different kind of faith from our saving faith. To another, gifts of healing, and to another, miraculous powers. And then finally, prophecy, the distinguishing between spirits, speaking in different kinds of tongues, and interpreting tongues. Now, if you look, these first three really kind of share something in common. I don't know why this does that, but we'll stop that. It's the understanding of God's activity in the world, wisdom or knowledge or faith by the same Spirit. God is at work in the world, and these first three gifts, they're given so that we understand God's working. This second, healing and miracles, is understanding and doing God's power in the world. Miracles or healings. And then the third is about understanding and speaking God's message to the world, whether that's in prophecy or in tongues, or understanding when something did not come from God, or interpreting tongues. And then at the end, we need to delete that section that we copied before, don't we? It's all of these are the work of one and the same Spirit. We come back here to the Spirit. He distributes them to each one just as he determines. And there's another conjunction that we would look for. So what is it that happens then in this passage? Let's take a look. First of all, we see the reference to the Trinity. Secondly, we see that gifts are given by the Spirit. desiring a particular gift, claiming a particular gift. Paul doesn't seem to know anything about that. Instead, he says when the Spirit sees that there is a need in the church, he will give a gift for the church to a member of the church. So gifts are given by the Spirit. Then we see three main types of manifestations of the Spirit. And those are understanding God's working in the world, understanding and pardon my grammar here, dooming God's power in the world, and then finally understanding and speaking God's message to the world. And then finally, we see that the gifts in verse 11 are given at the Spirit's pleasure. In essence, it's the Spirit who decides who gets what and how these are given. So there's our first study. This is the very first part of 1 Corinthians, and hope that was helpful to you. Tomorrow, if everything goes right, we'll come back and we will talk together about the next section, which has to do with the body. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.